It's often said, isn't it, that the liberal left is conspicuously silent when it comes to radical Islam. But in my experience, that's not entirely true. Many of them are very quick to label anyone who advocates freedom over theocracy as a racist and an Islamophobe. Indeed, after my last video, where I suggested that we should ban the misogynistic and fascist device known as the burqa, I received quite a lot of very angry emails from members of the multicultural appeasement lobby, the kind of people who'd put their own mothers and daughters in burqas to avoid being called intolerant, and who occupy such high moral ground that you can hardly see them up there through the clouds of self-righteousness. I'm talking about members of the enlightened liberal intelligentsia that has consistently shown itself to be anything but enlightened or liberal or intelligent, mainly because it's motivated more by a deep irrational hatred of America than by any real notion of justice or respect, and whose politically correct double standards and cringeworthy cowardice in the face of aggressive Islamism has led many liberal-minded people to actively despise the word liberal. You people have certainly reminded me, as if I needed reminding, why my political views have changed in recent years. You see, foolishly perhaps, I used to take freedom for granted, but now, thanks to ultra-tolerant, self-hating, multicultural lemmings like you, I don't. Politically, I used to always be on the liberal left, because I used to believe in things like social justice, tolerance, respect, you know, the good things in life. I still believe in those things, which is why I'm no longer on the liberal left. Because I believe that in aligning itself as it has so completely with the fascism of Islam, and in colluding with an ideology that wants to victimize minorities and kill people for their lifestyle, the liberal left has lost its way, lost its moral authority, and become a threat to our freedom. The medicine has become the disease. And I don't want to be contaminated, so where does that leave me now, politically? Does it leave me on the right? No, because that's the last place I want to be, so I suppose it leaves me somewhere in the middle, not knowing which way to turn, because my natural constituency has been poisoned by people like you, and I can't tell you how much I resent that. Actually, I probably could, but it might take a while. Some of you even stoop so low as to try and associate me with an organisation called the BNP, or the British National Party, when everybody who's seen my videos knows full well that my argument is with religion and has got nothing at all to do with race. And I believe the BNP has a racial agenda and is therefore a racist party. So I would rather vote for nobody at all. In fact, I'd rather drive a garden fork through my own foot than vote for the BNP. But this video is not about them. It's not about right-wing fascists. It's about the left-wing kind. And I think the word racist deserves a public apology for the way it's been hijacked and abused by you multicultural pimps, along with another public apology for all the victims of genuine racism, the people who have actually suffered because of the colour of their skin or where they happen to come from, and who can see that word being devalued every time one of you liars uses it to defend a religion, and a fascist religion at that. Race is irrelevant. We're all one race. That's obvious to anybody with half a brain. We're all part of the same organism. But we're not all one religion, are we? And we're not all one culture. And the truth is, and this is the truth, whether you clowns want to hear it or not, that many people in the West feel that we are being invaded, yes, that's the word, invaded, by a religion and a culture whose values we totally reject. Not because we're racists, but because the values themselves are degrading and offensive. The whole point of female concealment in Islamic society is that men are not expected to take responsibility for their sexual urges. So any woman who is not covered up from head to toe is asking to be raped. The burqa, therefore, legitimizes rape. It apologizes for rape. It justifies rape. Are you listening, feminists? And this makes it, in my opinion, as offensive a public statement as a Ku Klux Klan uniform or a Nazi swastika, and I think it should be treated with exactly the same revulsion and contempt. And as for the free choice argument that you like to defend so disingenuously, well, walking around naked is a free choice. Wearing a ski mask into a bank is a free choice, but in neither case would you get away with it for very long. This so-called choice to wear the burqa is exercised more here in the West than it is in Muslim countries, because here it's being used quite deliberately as a weapon of cultural jihad, in a naked attempt, if you'll pardon the expression, to undermine the most fundamental of our values, that every human being is born equal. In Islam, as you may have noticed, every human being is not born equal, not by a long way. And this does present us with a problem in the liberal West, the solution to which is not that we should show how reasonable and tolerant we are by compromising our principles, effectively turning them inside out so as not to cause offence. No, the solution is for Muslim men to start treating women as equals and not as possessions. That's the only solution. It's not negotiable, and saying so doesn't make anybody a racist. Sorry. As for Islamophobia, well, just because somebody offends you with their opinion, it doesn't give you the right to saddle them with a clinical condition. There is no such thing as Islamophobia. It simply doesn't exist. And most people now realise just what a cynical, manipulative lie that word really is. Suspicion of or dislike of Islam is not a phobia, it's an honest, healthy reaction to the evidence that's been provided. But although Islamophobia doesn't exist, I'll tell you what does exist in great abundance, and that's Islamo-nausea in people who are absolutely sick of Islam and its multicultural apologists. And let's not forget Islamophobia nausea. This is nausea brought on by constantly hearing the word Islamophobia. In fact, I've got to stop saying Islamophobia now because I'm already beginning to feel queasy. These words are being used quite shamelessly to try and engineer an artificial sense of guilt in Western society, to redefine our values as prejudices, and to silence legitimate opinion and the free exchange of ideas that have made us what we are and that have given us our strength. And that's why this is damaging our society in a fundamental way, and it has got to stop. All over the Western world, we've become so intimidated into watching every word and thought in case it might offend somebody's precious faith. It's as if the free world has forgotten to inhale. What happened to our birthright? We need to take a deep breath. We need to get the oxygen of freedom flowing through our veins again and through our brains again and get things back in perspective. We have nothing to apologize for and nothing to feel guilty about. And our way of life, despite its many faults, of which we're all very well aware, thank you, is still far, far superior to anything that Islam has to offer or will ever have to offer, especially if you're female or Jewish or homosexual or even just a common or garden blasphemer like me. That is the truth. And most people in the Western world realise it's the truth, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with them saying so as loudly and as often as they like. And you lefty, liberal, multicultural appeasement monkeys, you're not going to like it, and you're certainly not going to want to speak out for the values that give you the freedom to be the useful idiots you are. But if you could at least find it in your miserable, frightened little hearts not to slander those of us who do as racists, we'd all be very grateful. Peace. Well, some people didn't like my last video very much. They told me I should be attacking Islam, not Christianity. Why didn't someone tell me sooner? All the videos I've made, and not once have I attacked Islam. What was I thinking about? I blame the Jews, don't you? Well, in this video I intend to say a few words in support of Christians, but I still think Christianity is a laughable raft of insulting nonsense that any intelligent 6-year-old child would dismiss out of hand if they were allowed to have a mind of their own. I'm referring specifically to Christians in the Muslim world, God help them, if you'll pardon the expression. Who would have predicted that the Arab Spring, that bright new tomorrow of yesterday, would so quickly degenerate into a sordid Muslim Brotherhood takeover, with people arrested for blasphemy, women harassed in the street, and the violent persecution of Christians? Actually, I would have predicted it. Oh, you as well? And everybody you know? Well, it wasn't that hard to see coming down the road, was it? What a waste of a revolution. They finally get democracy and they vote for a bunch of religious fanatics. People that stupid don't deserve to be free. I guess somewhere down the line they'll just have to go through the whole thing all over again. Only next time I hope they'll be able to resist the urge to gang rape female news reporters in the street, although I wouldn't bet on it. The so-called Arab Spring has been a winter of persecution for Christians in particular, who are being driven out as Sharia is driven in. Like the Jews before them, Christians are being ethnically cleansed from Muslim countries, but the Western media don't want to talk about it because it means having to focus on the hateful supremacist doctrine of Islam, an ideology that confers inferior status on non-believers and demands their submission as dhimmis. Those noble Egyptian soldiers who refused to fire on their Muslim brothers during the revolution had no such qualms about shooting unarmed Christians in the street for protesting against unprovoked Muslim violence. Such is the insanity that even in Syria, despite being murdered in their thousands by their own government, the rebels have found time to put Christians on notice to leave. Now, I'm no fan of Christianity, but I am a fan of civilization and justice. And both of those things seem to be in very short supply in a part of the world where Christianity is being systematically erased, while the Christian President of the United States says nothing and looks the other way for fear of causing offence. He is a Christian, isn't he? I know some people think Obama is a Muslim because his middle name is Hussein, and because he bowed to the Saudi king like a vassal, and because he sucks up to Islam every chance he gets, because he humiliated his country by apologising to Islamic terrorists, and because his administration is crippled by a chronic political correctness that empowers jihadis pretending to be Americans. But I wouldn't say that makes the president a Muslim. I'd say that makes him a dhimmi, and I think he and his administration are doing their best to turn the United States into a dhimmi nation. Recently he welcomed the election of an Islamist president in Egypt, a man who during his campaign, a campaign supported by the US government, made the statement, "The Quran is our constitution, the Prophet is our leader, jihad is our path, and death in the name of Allah is our goal." A man who belongs to an organisation that has vowed in its charter to infiltrate Western society and destroy it from within. In short, the new Egyptian president is a jihadi, which is a word the Obama administration can't even bring itself to use in case somebody gets offended. It's actually quite amusing to watch an American government spokesman wriggling around trying not to say the words Islamic or jihad when talking about Islamic jihad, until you realise the level of denial you're actually witnessing, and you can't help but wonder if it's possible to trust this person's judgment or their word about anything at all. Oh, and you might like to know that despite the First Amendment, the Obama administration is behaving on the world stage as if free speech is actually negotiable. Right now they're engaged in dialogue with a bunch of Islamic dictatorships to help them find ways of curbing free speech through the United Nations Human Rights Council, when what passes for human rights in any of those places will be against the law in the civilized world, and the only dialogue any of them deserve is 3 short words: go to hell. Oh, and P.S. stop murdering Christians. Obama wants to be cosy with Islam because he's got an Islamic background himself, and because he wants to be cosy with the third world in general. He isn't just America's first black president, he's America's first third world president, and that's his problem. There must be a part of Obama that just feels so guilty about going to America, becoming successful and leaving all those people behind, that he just has to reach out and say, "Hey people, it's me, Barry, you still like me, don't you?" But they don't like him because they despise weakness, especially in the Islamic world. And there he's even less popular than George W. Bush, which is something I'd have thought a person would have to work at. But Obama has managed it effortlessly. And he's getting less popular in the first world as well, because people can see how he deals with Islamic extremists, and they can see that he's not actually fit to be President of the United States. Now, don't get me wrong, he may be fit to lead another country, a European country perhaps, where fundamental rights are not quite so important. Besides, he's a European by instinct anyway, an accommodationist, a compromiser, a dhimmi. He doesn't realise that the American president has a duty beyond America to the whole free world to stand up for American values, not third world values, because despite all the propaganda, they are not, in fact, equal. If Christians are being persecuted in the Muslim world purely because of their religion, and they are, the American president has a duty to speak out loudly and often until somebody listens. Instead, this president chooses to remain silent. He chooses to continue shoveling bucket loads of American taxpayers' money into the Arab world without even a polite request that they stop murdering Christians. And if you think that's slimy, every year the US State Department issues a report on the state of human rights in all UN member countries. This year, for the first time, they removed the section on religious freedom, thus neatly sidestepping the need to acknowledge the violent persecution of Christians since the glorious revolution for freedom and democracy. Who would have thought that the United States, of all countries, would so cravenly turn its back on persecuted Christians in their darkest hour, just so as not to offend their Muslim persecutors? America, thanks to this president, is already a dhimmi nation. Peace. Here in Britain we have a newspaper called The Guardian, whose reputation as a sanctimonious mouthpiece for the great multicultural contrick is now being eclipsed by a more rancid reputation for anti-Semitism. The Guardian used to represent what used to be called the liberal tradition, and at one time it could be relied on for reasonably balanced coverage, sloping to the left of course, but in a fair way, an honest way. Those days have gone. Nowadays, The Guardian has become so obsessed with the state of Israel and has come to hate it with such a lopsided Scandinavian intensity that it's lost all sense of proportion. Nowadays, The Guardian publishes writers who engage in anti-Semitic slurs. It willingly acts as a propaganda platform for the murdering terrorists of Hamas, and it misrepresents the facts in the Middle East to persuade its readers to support a fascist religious war of hate against a genuine democracy where Arabs and Jews have equal rights, although you'll never hear about that in The Guardian, whose writers prefer to push the lie, the fiction of the apartheid state. When it was forced to respond to repeated accusations of being anti-Semitic, The Guardian seemed a lot more concerned with the possible damage to its reputation than with whether or not anti-Semitism is a bad thing. When I think we all know that if Muslims were complaining about Islamophobia, they'd be trampling over each other at The Guardian to put things right. But Jews, nah. And what all this means is that if you let it be known that you read The Guardian, it now says something about you that, on reflection, you may not want it to say. In short, The Guardian is now stigmatising its own readers. Not that many of them don't do a fine job of stigmatising themselves. Guardian readers are, in the main, educated, middle-class people who regard themselves as liberal, leftish, intellectual types, not the common clay, as it were. And many of them inhabit a rarefied bubble of hypocrisy that only they seem unaware of. For example, they call themselves liberal, yet they're often the most enthusiastic about censoring the opinions of others, which is about the most illiberal thing you can do. This is because The Guardian is written by and for the same narrow class of patronising know-it-all pinheads who've stolen the BBC from the rest of us and destroyed its impartiality. The kind of people who are so smug in their shallow certainties and so sure of the moral superiority of their views that they have no compunction about slandering anyone who disagrees as a fascist or a crank. Such as the BBC's hatred of Israel, by the way, that they couldn't even give it a capital city in their Olympic guide, yet they gave one to the Palestinians, who haven't even got a country and never will have, the way they're going about it. Both The Guardian and the BBC are part of what's called the progressive consensus, under whose auspices the language has been systematically emasculated, and words like tolerance and fairness and diversity and, well, progressive, no longer mean what they say. In each case, the shell of the word is still there, but it's been hollowed out and filled with something altogether less savoury and actually quite sinister. In this artificial PC newspeak world, the feckless and the stupid, for example, are never referred to as feckless or stupid because that might damage their self-esteem. Instead, they're called disadvantaged and vulnerable, which renders them victims and, as such, automatically virtuous. And we all know by now that the golden rule for virtuous victims is that they should never be required to take responsibility for their actions or their circumstances. It must always, somehow, be somebody else's fault. It's what I call the Palestinian syndrome, and it saturates The Guardian from cover to cover. So who reads The Guardian? Multiculties, liberal lefties, touchy-feely, bleeding hearts. Is that a stereotype? I do hope not. The kind of people who cause 10 times as many problems as they solve because they're so willfully naive on everyone else's behalf. People who throw the words racist and Islamophobe around like monkeys with their own feces, and who love diversity but make sure their own kids go to a school where everybody speaks English. Maybe you know some fossilised old lefty who's still mentally wearing a Che Guevara t-shirt. You can bet your life they read The Guardian. And you probably know one of those comically self-righteous anti-capitalists with a mortgage and a pension. There's another Guardian reader. Self-hating Jews who support the Palestinians, women and gay people who defend Islamic misogyny and homophobia all read The Guardian, and you know you're firmly in Guardian territory when you find yourself being lectured on social justice by some middle-aged, university-educated prick who spent his whole life on the dole. Guardian readers are the kind of people who gravitate to the high moral ground on just about every issue because their values, being leftish liberal values, are automatically more virtuous than everybody else's. So virtuous are they, in fact, that they appear to be impregnable even to the stigma of anti-Semitism if it's in a good cause. And there is no better cause for a committed Guardianista, no cause more holy, meaning more fashionable to support at dinner parties, than romanticising the murdering terrorists of Hamas as freedom fighters, when freedom is actually what they're fighting against. The Guardian and its sheep-like readers agonise endlessly about the poor Palestinians, while maintaining a rigorous ideological blindness to the core problem, which is that the Jews want peace and the Arabs don't, because the Arabs are driven primarily by religious hatred. So whatever the Jews concede will never, ever be enough, because the Arabs want blood. They want the Jews dead. They don't want a two-state solution, Guardian readers. They want a one-state solution with no goddamn Jews in it, and they've repeatedly made it crystal clear that they will settle for nothing less. Is everybody deaf? So if this is your position, and if you support Hamas, as The Guardian does, it is definitely your position. Sieg Heil, anyone? Then you need to be a bit more honest about your position and admit that what you're supporting ultimately is religious genocide. On the other hand, if it's not your position, then maybe you should do yourself a favour and stop reading The Guardian, because right now, every time you pick that thing up, you leave a film of filth on your soul. Peace, and so on and so forth. Yeah.